There we go.
Hi, all.
Welcome here. We're having a discussion here wonderfully today with Robin from the Book Wormhole about The Space Between Worlds, which is a wonderful, gripping science fiction book. And yeah, I'm glad that any of you that show up can join us.
I gotta say, like, usually when it comes to reviewing books, I'm like, you can either read this or don't. Like, I'm not your mom. I'm not gonna tell you what to do. But this is one of the few exceptions where I'm like, if you have any interest in this book at all, pick it up. It is so good. Like, it's generally one of the best books I've read ever. So, like, I can't speak highly enough about it.
Yeah, I've basically been telling every single person that I have run into as they do their wrap-ups for the year. Like, this is the book that, it wasn't the best book I read in 2021, but it was in my top 10, and it was maybe the most surprising book I read in 2021. It
definitely
just came out of nowhere. And so I feel like that in and of itself just makes it memorable to me. And so I'm always like, you have to read this. Like, if you like anything, any of the themes in this book, just pick it up.
So did you want to start by summarizing it? I don't know if you have a summary already come up with.
Yeah, this is a hard book to summarize because I feel like this book has a lot of story to it. So I think my summary is going to err on the side of caution. So this is the story of a woman who is a world traveler. She works for an organization that sends her to other versions of our world, other realities. And modern technology has found a way to do this, but has not found a way to make it seamless just yet. And one of the issues they've encountered is if you try to send someone to a world where a version of them still is alive, still exists, they will die. So this woman gets by in her job basically by not having very many versions of herself left in the greater sphere of the universe. And she's motivated to do this by helping her family economically, by trying to gain status to have the chance to immigrate to the city, which has a lot more opportunities. And, she has a couple friends that are a part of this system that are helping her along. And yeah, I would say that's just the basic summary.
I think you did a good job at that, because one of the reasons my December wrap up was so late is that, like, I could not figure out how to write a synopsis for this book. Like, that was the last thing I had to finish on my script, was the synopsis, just because, like, yeah, that's the basis of it. But there's so much else going on, and there's so much that, like I didn't want to spoil. I don't know if you're comfortable with this being talking about spoilers in this.
Yeah.
Okay. Just want to clear that up. So yeah, any viewers who haven't yet read the book, we will be talking about plot spoilers. So be cautious. If not, go watch Joan's wrap up or my wrap up for a spoiler-free review of this book.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I would definitely say that, yes. If you're here and you have not read the book, probably in like 5 or so minutes, we'll shift to actually talking about things that happened in the book. So if you don't wish to be spoiled, you should probably leave by then. But right now, if you're interested in the concept, that's basically what the concept is. And it seems very very lacking, and part of that is this story is a story of multitude. It is many stories. It just unravels in such a way that you really can't talk about the plot without spoiling it.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, definitely, like, reading this book, I said in my wrap up, is just like a ball of yarn unwinding, and like it's really artfully done that like I just wanted to keep reading more and more, but it also was so like unexpected, and not unpleasantly so. It wasn't like what's going on, but it is just like, oh, so this is what's happening. And then like you know, it just makes you want to read on more to see, oh, what else is going to happen. But this book really kept me on my toes throughout. I honestly couldn't predict anything that was going to happen, and that's very rare for me. I usually always know what's going on in a book.
Yeah, I think that was something I actually extremely enjoyed about this book, was how much it surprised me. I thought I
Mm-hmm.
was signing up for one thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it looked like it was very clear that that was the thing that was going to happen throughout the whole book. And then it sort of shifted gears and another thing came out of nowhere, and I was like, wait, what is this? What's going on over here? I'm intrigued. And I've rarely seen that happen. I don't know of a lot of books that can pull off having multiple plots, multiple storylines.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's very clear like where the story is headed. It's going to have its like plot, it's going to hit like its problem and then the solution. And just this was like a roller coaster of emotions, so much so that I
For
like
sure.
couldn't put it down, and at parts I was reading it standing up. I don't know why that's a thing I do when I'm like really into something, but I just had nothing in my body that was relaxed because I had to
Yeah.
find out what happened next.
I don't know if you have any talking points that isn't a spoiler before we do go into the spoilers. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I would say probably like what is it, like core concepts of the story, like things that like were big takeaways. Like, was there something that you got out of this book, like a theme that came to mind that like
Yeah, I think one of the themes that I didn't know going into this book, but that is very apparent throughout it and is just like very wonderfully sci-fi in the aspect that it comments on our society is like the dichotomy between the rich and the poor, and how it's exampled between both Wiley City and Ashtown, that they're these vastly different places living right next to each other. Wiley City is incredibly wealthy, and Ashtown is pretty much the slums. And these two places exist in a future that is ruined by climate change. And Ashtown is a desert and they suffer from terrible weather conditions, and like the air is always polluted, and it has, you know, like all the issues of the climate change that they're facing, whereas Wiley City feels like you're like run of the mill like futuristic city where everything is so clean, like there's plants everywhere, and like they're just practically living in this bubble, and like climate doesn't even touch them there. Everything is just like so guarded from that reality that like they're not even impacted at all. And I feel like that is so realistic to how things is for us right now, because there is such this huge gap between the rich and the poor, and that the rich and the poor are affected by things differently, even just with like COVID. Like the rich people don't experience it the same way poor people do. Poor people are kind of forced to go to work. You know, they don't have the luxury of saying, you know, I can't afford to get sick, but I really need to pay my bills, so I need to go out and work, even though I'm putting myself at risk. Whereas a rich person could literally just be like, oh, like, yeah, I can stay home, like, no biggie, you know? So that was one of the surprising aspects of the book, but one that I just so appreciated.
yeah, I think I agree. I think that's such a big theme for the book. And I think also sort of a warning. I think, you know, a lot of sci-fi acts as a warning to us about where we're at in our own world. And we're at a point where the gap between, you know, the rich and the poor is extremely great. And that divide is destroying our economy and not helping our earth and climate change at all. And so I think that that was very intentional, that the author was like, hey, this is how things kind of are, and
Mm-hmm.
they can still get worse. I think for me, one theme that I thought was very interesting was just the concept of the alternate realities, the concept of like alternate versions of oneself and the people you know, and the fact that you can never really fully know yourself or anyone else. I think one of the things I really liked was the main character sort of has this motto throughout the book that like she never really believes anymore that there's like one version of one person or one core set of things that is true about oneself, because there are so many versions of like one person in this world that you can run into an encounter, and they're so different that it shows that even if you think you know somebody, you really don't know somebody. You don't know the core morals that drive them. You don't know the thoughts they have that they never tell you, or the secrets they're hiding. Our main character too, I won't get into spoilers just yet, but our main character too is a multitude of secrets that you as the reader get to discover along with the people in her life as she sort of uncovers these layers. And it really does bring up a good point that like, even if you have really good and trusting relationships with people, you'll never really fully know someone. And that's something I think we always like to think that we know. We always want to say, like, oh, I know someone really well, I totally understand them. But yet in our society, we have this space for, you know, people change, people transition in and out of your life for different reasons. And part of that is because humans aren't like, we're not one set thing. Life happens, events happen, and we change and we make decisions and we become slightly different versions of ourselves, even between year to year. Like, I'm not the same person I was a decade ago at all.
Not the same person I was last year.
Yeah, so I think that's an important topic, and something I think, again, sci-fi sort of uncovers the things that are true in our world, something we don't like to talk about. We don't like to talk about the fact that we are agents of change and that we can change. And, you know, the book, it's not just about, you know, being afraid that people you care about can change in a way that will make them no longer a part of your life, but that people you have written off as evil, terrible, awful people could change to be better people. There could be a version of reality where they're okay, or where they start to make better decisions. And how does that make you feel if you've been hurt by these people? And I think that those are sort of messy concepts that the author takes on and doesn't really handhold you through that, which I highly enjoyed. I liked being able to have to think critically and deeply, and even with my emotions, about how I felt about how all these different characters, alternate versions, were being portrayed.
Yeah, like piggybacking off of what you were saying at the end there is a character who is like an enemy in most of the universes and like has a very personally abusive relationship with the main character in nearly every single universe she's been in, and yet she meets one iteration of him where he's actually a decent person. And I, like, as a reader reading that, I remember feeling so cautious because like I was so in the main character's head space that I was like this has to be fake, like there has to be something that's, you know, gonna go wrong, that he's gonna hurt her. And yeah, it just, being put in that headspace, it made me reevaluate why I was feeling that way. I don't think like Johnson wrote that to be apologetic to abusers, but I also think it's important to write characters like that because no one is inherently evil, and like that concept of the inherently evil person is super problematic. It's something I never like to see in books because it's just not accurate. And I feel like she does a really good job of relaying that in this story, that like there is, you know, more sides to one person, and it is a nurture versus nature thing. Like he isn't inherently, like his nature isn't to be violent or to be abusive. It's kind of the situation he was put in, you know? So I thought that was so bold and so well done that I've just never seen that in a book before, you know?
Yeah, agreed. I think that it's important to show that people are products of their environment, but that also people are nuanced.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, even for the course of how the story is set up, as we start to like have kind of like a main antagonist for our story that like really plays into that morally gray, questionable area, like that. I feel like, another cautionary tale for this is like we tend to not really question people who have a lot of power, and who we assume are doing really good things. We don't like check in on them and question what their motives are. Like the nemesis for this book is really dark and twisted and evil just because you don't see it coming, and because
Mm-hmm.
it really is true that like there are these people who you think are doing really good work, who you don't really question very strongly, who actually have a gazillion ulterior motives, and you're like now a part of their evil plan. It's very corporate too. That's another thing I
Mm-hmm.
really enjoyed about this book, is it really puts a light on the fact that like corporate systems
Mm-hmm.
are just kind of evil in general.
Yeah.
um So yeah, I would say that that's probably what we've got for the spoiler free edition of the Space Between Worlds. So
Yeah.
if this so far has interested you, please do go check it out. Go read it. It is an amazing read. It is very fast paced, in my opinion, so it really doesn't take long at all to get into it.
Yeah, I think I read it in like 4 days. It was one of the quicker reads I've read this past year, so.
Yeah, it's really hard to put down once you hit like the main action. It's just, you really can't stop. So yeah, that being said, we will switch now to talking about the book from a spoiler point of view, as we have both finished this. So if you don't wish to be spoiled, have a good afternoon.
We'll see you next time.
So yeah, spoilery thoughts. Lay it on me. What do
All
you got?
right. Well, to talk about the main big bad, I actually don't remember his name now.
Was
Do
it
you,
Adam? I think Adam was
Adam?
like his like fancy name.
Yeah, okay, we're gonna call him Adam then because I actually don't remember it. I don't want to waste time by actually looking through the book. What I liked about Adam is we get the evil version of him in the current universe where he is corporate and he has power from being a corporate head figure. But there's also another universe where he is from the slums and he is like I don't know if like mafia is the right word, but like he's like the head of like these gangs and like he's super vile there too. And I just really like that we see this violence from two distinct opposites and that like these roles of power have always just really appealed to him and that he abuses these. And again, like it shows those two like dichotomies, but like they end up being the same in a way, like his violence, like when he is like a gang leader, like is quite literal, like physically hurting people, whereas his violence as like the corporate head guy, like is in a way more insidious because it's not outright there, but he's still like killing people, literally, knowing that he's killing people. And yeah, it's just it really is the same, even though he's put in these different situations. And I thought that was so fascinating.
Yeah, I think the corporate version of him was so sanitized, and I think part of that was because it's a judgment call, right? Because again, I feel like we live in a society where there are a lot of people who are like that. We have people, throughout the world who are in power, whether it be in government or in corporations, who are this exact kind of evil that Adam is, who has this exact kind of rhetoric. But do we recognize it most of the time? And I think the answer is no, because there's something that seems so sanitized about it, so like mundane, like formulaic, very removed. Like, oh, I guess, I have to be the one who has all the science, so no one else can do the science. That seems pretty chill and tame, right? Versus, like, I think we tend to paint a very strong picture of people who are doing more intimate violence. Like, I think, like, even when we look at the way, police people, like, who ends up in prison? Well, a lot of people who are a part of, like, drug cartels, who are a part of gangs, who were doing these organized violences, especially more like low level, but I mean, still, we tend to criminalize their leaders a lot. Like, oh, the evil drug cartel. But, like, we don't do that about Jeff Bezos. We're not, like, sitting here like Jeff Bezos is evil because he, takes advantage of hundreds of thousands of workers so he can go to space and do nothing. We don't question that. So I think that was very much the author was making a direct connection by giving us two versions of Adam, because she's trying to say that, like, okay, you personally feel more strongly about one than you do the other, right? Because that's like a core thing that we have. We feel more strongly about, violence we can name and put labels on and see as, like, evil and messy and dangerous, versus, like, this, like, sanitized corporate evil that, like, you're like, is it really a bad thing?
Right, yeah. I think you phrased that really well, to be honest.
Yeah, that stuck with me deeply. I was like, I think we're really painting a picture here of, like, what gets criminalized, what gets pointed at in our society. So
let me think of another point. I really liked the, like, found family aspect of the book. Like, I just absolutely loved Kara's relationship with, I think it's Esther, or was it Edith? I don't remember.
I think it was Esther. It's so bad. I am terrible at remembering names, and because I read this book like a month ago now,
literally too.
I don't even remember the main character's name, and I feel so bad. I should probably open a tab where I have, like, a list of character names.
I'm almost confident it's Esther, but I really liked their relationship, and again, just like how, like, nuanced it is. Like, they have a overall really positive relationship, but, like, there's still, like, moments of tension and moments of, like, misunderstanding, and I felt like that was so accurate to how people actually are. I feel like pretty much every single relationship in this book is like that you can tell that, like, these two people are very connected, but there's these moments of, like, tension that aren't just there solely for drama. It's more like just reflective of how people actually are, where there is going to be moments where you don't understand the person that you love, and that goes back to, like, what you said about, like, how this book relates, that you don't really know people, and I feel like Johnson took that concept and really put it in every single, like, character interaction in the book, pretty much.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Kara's relationship with her mentor. I forget his name too.
I think his name was Jean, I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Yeah, so their relationship to me was extremely sweet and extremely important.
Absolutely. I loved his character too.
Yeah.
Like, he had such a vivid backstory, despite being, like, one of the, like, not as important characters in the book. But, like, I just loved how that was incorporated, and I don't remember the specific details. I just remember he was somehow involved in, like, a civil war. And I think he was, like, a child soldier too in the Civil War.
Yeah.
And it felt so real. I feel like not to like somewhat like sidetrack on this, but this book, I had a hard time figuring out where it took place. It definitely takes place on Earth, but I couldn't like pinpoint like a city or a country. But at the same time, it feels like it could happen right next door. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to picture where this book takes place. Obviously, there is the mention of Japan, so we know we're not in Japan because one of the characters comes from Japan. And I don't know if they said where Jean came from, but he's definitely somewhere from Africa. Um, but yeah, like just that kind of like not specified location yet, it feels absolutely real. You know, that it's like I can definitely picture this to be a real place, you know?
Yeah, I don't even I again, I could be totally wrong. In my brain doesn't double check facts. It just like makes a mini model in my brain. I kind of got the feeling that Wiley City was kind of like somewhere in Europe and that Ashtown was in like Central Africa, like below like the northern African area where things are very prosperous, but like midway. Just because like in my brain, again, I have no sense of geography, how long it takes to travel that far. Like I know Europe and Africa are connected in some ways. There are ways overland you could get there, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
know how long that takes. But I also didn't really know how long in the story it took them when they were traveling back and forth. But I got that vibe based on like the history of the characters and the
Mm-hmm.
descriptions of the locations. I also felt like that was very much a nod to our modern immigration
Mm-hmm.
concepts because like we don't really want these people from these other countries living in our modern Western society unless they
Mm-hmm.
have something to give us, something of value that's risky. I felt like that was a theme that was constantly reiterated, because Kara she was on like this temporary visa. And
Mm-hmm.
if she couldn't continually be useful to her employer, it was out of there for her. So,
And even like I think one of the first things that happens in this book is like one of her coworkers gets fired, and they're also someone who isn't from Wiley City, and they are pretty much told to pack up and get going, you know, when they lost their job. So like that was just so striking to me because it felt extremely cruel, but it also felt so incredibly probable. You know, it didn't feel unrealistic.
yeah. This does make me wonder. I wonder, if Johnson at some point would go back to this world and explore a different story within it, because
I
I
would
feel
love.
like the world is much bigger than the one we get. Like I feel like the part of it's very squished to just Wiley City and Ashtown and the
Mhm.
surrounding area of Ashtown, because that's like the central plot of this story. But I like know the world has to be as big as Earth is. There have to be other places and other stories and other interesting things. And so it'd be kind of cool to see that visited. But maybe that's like just wishful thinking that I just like want more of this particular world.
I would absolutely read another story from this world. And yeah, I feel like it is very like magnified on one aspect. I wouldn't even mind like a story taking place in one of the different versions of Earth too.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know like she briefly gives us glimpses at these other versions of Earth, but they're nothing more than that. They're usually just glimpses to like further flesh out the concept of these different Earths and the variations in each of them. But so interesting, so much packed into here. I honestly can't believe this is a debut novel.
Yeah.
Like
Mm-hmm.
it was fantastic. I'm trying to remember. I know it was up for the Hugo this year, but I don't think it won, which is a shame because it should
That's
have.
really
It was
sad.
so fantastic. I don't remember what won in place of it. Whatever it did, I didn't read. But
Yeah, I thought it was masterfully done. I definitely did felt that this was um, beyond um, good for a debut novel. So,
Yeah, I don't know why I'm suddenly like rethinking about where I thought this book takes place, but this might be influenced by like what I read about the author's biography, but I'm thinking it's almost takes place in LA and then Ashtown is like the Mojave Desert because it's like 2 hours away from LA and I know she at least lived in the Mojave.
ooh, that could be interesting. Yeah, I wonder if there has to be interviews on this.
Yeah, I
I'm sure
haven't
that
watched
there has
any.
to be an answer to what the inspiration for this is. But I do agree that, like, I don't know, there's a lot wrapped up in the themes of this. And I think that closer to home could be interesting as well.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'm so curious.
Yeah, no, I'm like, I gotta start looking to see if she's done any talks on it or whatnot, or see if I can get an interview with her. That hasn't worked out so far, but I've tried with other authors.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I feel like it's very rooted in the now, as in, like, I can see where different things have been inspired from. So, and I think it will age well too. I don't think um, like it's a story that will become irrelevant. I think that these themes will sadly persist, or if they don't, then it's kind of more like reflective of a time that once was, which is very optimistically thinking. But yeah,
Yeah, I think that's a big part of too the vagueness and location. I think was also meant to be to not alienate readers, that if
yeah,
you saw a correlation between something in your own life and this, that was a segue for you to be able to do that. Because I think the dichotomy between Wiley City and Ashtown happens in many, many, many places on Earth.
yeah.
And so, like, if that is a reality for you personally, then that is a connection that you can make to those specific places. And I think that a book also lasts longer when it does that, because, like, you can constantly draw connections versus relying on a place and time that will change and meet expectations or not meet expectations. Yeah, I feel like a lot of this book too was a deep look at just racial tensions in a way that I think is sometimes easy to gloss over, but yet is so in your face and there for a reason.
Hmm.
Our main character very much does highlight how her life has basically been shaped and destroyed and messed up because of the fact that she is not of a desirable race, not of a desirable area of the world,
Hmm.
and she's kind of screwed. This version of her only has survived because she has managed to escape her own world and come to a different one, where she can just kind of blend in and, like, hijack things.
Hmm.
And it's sad too because she wants better for herself. She wants to be a version of herself that she couldn't be in her Ashtown self. And she's always aiming for that. And then when she finds that, like, these other wildly successful people who come from where she's from, roughly, the same kind of background, so like John and Adam are these problematic characters who have, like, dark things that they do in order to keep themselves where they are. She has to reconsider that, like, is that who I am I this
Hmm.
kind of person who, in order to assimilate, in order to fit in, is willing to do these unseemly, unsavory things that I won't be able to, accept myself for? Or would I rather go back to being my Ashtown self, where I get to do all of this, like, random horrible stuff, that people criminalize me for, but yet is still so much better than, like, this other opportunity that's being handed to me. And I think she has to start, taking apart the value judgment that she has put on her own home, that she has like, come to believe, similar to a lot of the people around her in this like sanitized world, that Ashtown is horrible and bad and full of these awful people and these runners, and oh my gosh, they're so horrible. But then in the end, they're the people that end up helping her and the community that she ends up finding herself a part of, because at the end of the day, they understand her. They are her culture. They are her background. They are her people. And Wiley City was never going to be that, because those people never wanted her. And I think that that's just very deep.
Definitely very deep and very well done too. It doesn't come across as like patronizing or anything. It's just very nuanced the way it's done. But you're right. Like, she finds alliance with her own people. I mean, she has help from a very few individuals in Wiley City, but they, for the most part, seem like they also come from the same background. Like, Jean is one of the people who helps her the most, and he has come from a very like poor background himself. And in some ways, I almost didn't like that Dell had come from a high class background, because it seemed so like, oh well, I don't think all rich people are bad. Like, Dell gets it, kind of the like development between Kara and Dell is like that Kara thinks that Dell's always looking down on her, and that Dell's the one who thinks of her as less. And at the end, it's kind of revealed that, oh no, Dell's actually really cool and chill. I almost didn't like that.
Yeah, I felt Dell's character was interesting too, because I think in the makeup of the story, Dell's character serves the purpose of showing that, I mean, and I think to an extent, Adam's character does this as well, but I think Dell's character does it better, is that the issue at hand is the greater society and not the individual people. So, one thing that comes up a lot in feminism is that sometimes a woman's greatest enemy is another woman. And in this case, Kara, as a woman of color, her greatest enemy, almost a person that's always got what she doesn't have, is Dell, another woman of color who comes from a completely different background and a completely different world where things are much better. Like, Japan is a much more technically advanced country, where a lot of people from Japan are seen as very, worthy of modern recognition, in comparison to Kara, who comes from Ashtown, which is a very different place. And it's not that either Dell or Kara hold animosity towards each other because of their difference in backgrounds, but that's society's pressure doing that for them. And so I think Kara is very untrustworthy of Dell, because she sees Dell as someone who has everything she wants, everything she feels she should have, but Dell hasn't had to work for it. And why? And I think that it just complicates things, that they have feelings for each other, because that just adds another layer of like awkwardness and not talking out their feelings.
Yeah.
I think Kara connects with John a lot easier, because John has a very similar background and very similar motives to stay where he's at, and understands that, Wiley City isn't his home and he has to work really hard to stay there. Whereas for Dell, that's just easiness. It just goes easy for her because it is the situation that she's in. And so she can't really fully connect with what Kara is going through. And Kara kind of resents her a bit for that. And like, it kind of shows. And then, you've got whatever the tension is that came from the previous Kara that didn't help at all. So yeah, I think it's meant to show that, like, even if someone is supposed to be your friend, like, okay, you're both queer women of color, you both have these fundamental things that are similar, you're still different people and have different experiences and are seen differently within society. And what does that do to the relationship, you want to build, and what does that do when it comes to being like compatriots in something? Like, do you trust the other person to have your back when you do things that could not go well? And like Kara doesn't really trust Dell to be there for her when she starts to plan like these detailed plans of doing not great things. So I don't know, I found that interesting. It was frustrating to read, but I think was very much meant to highlight just how not right this society is, and just how similar this not right society is to our not right society.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's a interesting interpretation and kind of reconciles a bit of those feelings I had towards it. I gotta say, I did slightly guess that the previous Kara had a relationship with Dell, but not right away. It took a while. Like, I think the first hint that Johnson dropped about it when Dell came to Kara's apartment and make some comment about like a picture or something, that's when I kind of clicked to me that I'm like, okay, Dell's been here before, so she probably was here with the previous Kara. I don't know where I was going. Okay, so I kind of liked how much of like a jerk previous Kara was. Especially coming from her background. This Kara like comes from a religious background, and she obviously has a lot of religious trauma attributed to her character, and she's kind of homophobic, but in a way that is so realistic to a lot of like these people experience with the church, that they kind of learn to internalize that hatred and like, you know, act out in complicated ways, which I think previous Kara did a little bit more of. But I liked seeing that iteration and what that served to the like messages of the story. It's kind of just like a side plot that I thought was really cool and well done.
Yeah, I think that was pretty cool too, and I think it also worked to highlight the complex relationship that Kara has with her mother. As you know, it's weird, but the Kara in the world that loses her mother very early on, despite the fact that she goes through a lot more trauma in having to become an adult without her mom and without the support system, she actually becomes a more well-rounded and interesting person because of the lack of her mother. Whereas the Kara that has her mother is kind of messed up. And I think that part of that is because her mother is kind of messed up. And I feel like in relation to this specific world, didn't start to work on herself or become a better person until she'd gotten remarried and found religion and had these other children. And so of course Kara is going to resent a lot of that like her mother couldn't change for her but could change for these other people. I think I found the like mother-daughter scene in this completely compelling. I think it was because I was just thinking of like my own personal connection to my mother, and a lot of that rang true. A lot of connections there, and I felt that was a big part of the story, was who was Kara in relationship to her mother and her mother's bad choices in life. And each universe had a slightly different spin on that because it all depended on like how did her mother go and at what time. I forget what it was, which world it was. There was one where like her mother was like the cause of her death or something.
I think there was a couple ones
Yeah.
where like her mom just neglected her and like she died as a baby because of that.
Yeah, and I think that was really compelling. I feel like that was for me an early connection that I built with Kara's character, because like I was like, wow, I can kind of relate to that, but also it's weird to think, because I think when someone is someone you care about but also inherently problematic, you want to see what if the situation was different, would they be a different person? And this book actually gets to explore that. Like if the situation was different, would Kara's mother have been more involved? Would she have been a better mother? Would she have changed the way she chose to do things? Would she overcome her addictions? And in some universes that doesn't happen. and some it kind of does, and some it happens very late in life. And I think that, you know, Kara has to come to terms with that. And I think part of the very unlikable, like abrasive Kara of this world that we've lost, you know, I think part of why she was so awful was because her relationship with her mother was just very bad.
Yeah.
Whereas the Kara that we get our storyline from, she didn't really have a very long relationship with her mother. Her mother passed when she was very young, and so she kind of had a chance to really appreciate having a family now. Like, she was suddenly gifted a stepdad and some siblings, and like her mom is a different person, and get to explore that. And you know, we don't always get that chance. So I found that was extremely compelling. I think, you know, Kara always had to be making choices in comparison to who her mother was and what her mother was doing.
Yeah, I think that was really well done and really cool and true to life, because I think, yeah, a lot of like what Kara like what ended up happening to her in her life was kind of set on path by what her mom's early decisions were, which is unfortunately very true to life. When you're young and vulnerable, it's up to your parents. So, but yeah, I think Johnson absolutely took advantage of every single opportunity presented, you know, to just explore any sort of like, I don't think deviations is the word I'm looking for, but any sort of like difference between every world. So, which is what made this book so compelling. I think before I read this, I really went into this completely blind. I wasn't sure what the multi-universes would look like, and I almost thought it would be like, oh, okay, like maybe like magic exists in one world, and you know, like completely different universes, not just like these very similar Earths that just like differ by a single degree. So I honestly didn't know what to expect, but I definitely kind of like this version a little bit more. It ended up being a lot less fantastical and more like of a thinker.
Yeah, I do. I think I very much appreciated that the alternate worlds were very similar to one another. Like, I think that was unique and interesting because sometimes that shows us more about the differences in our society. I feel like that was really cool for sure. I also really liked that, like, some of the worlds were like, you know, just a little bit different. Like, some still had certain events that hadn't passed or had passed. And like, just like also the exploration of like modern weaponry, and that like some societies don't have weapons at all and some still do have weapons available. That was like a very weird and interesting concept to me, because I mean, what would our world be like if we didn't have weapons? But also then you realize that the world doesn't have weapons for like this evil ulterior motive.
Yeah. I did think that was a really cool aspect, since I feel like science fiction and even fantasy sometimes relies a little too much on weapons. And so this focused a lot more on violence that doesn't come from weapons, because there is a lot of violence that isn't outright aggressive like that. And it ended up being even darker in points, I think, just with like the runners, and they would drive their vehicles and just run over people. Like, that's how they killed people. Like, that was so much darker than like shooting someone up, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think that works to uncover a really unsavory fact. You know, again, love science fiction covering these unsavory facts about humanity, but that, I mean, if we get rid of weapons, which would be great, no lie, like it would be awesome, it doesn't change the fact that humans have violent tendencies and that violence will always exist. Murder will always exist. You can't eradicate these things. And part of it does come from the way our society is set up. Like, would the runners exist, and would they do the things they did if the society wasn't the way it was? And you know, you could argue that a few people would be violent regardless of the societal situations. But I feel like a lot of this comes from the fact that the society is so uneven.
Mm-hmm.
And taking away weapons, or at least like very obvious choices of weapons, doesn't mean that like the problems that cause people to kill one another still don't exist in this world. And I think that's like a cautionary tale. I think because like I think a lot of us, and I think I'm a big part of this particular discussion, think that it would be great if we could, you know, make it so that the world has less weapons and people have access to less weapons, and think that that's like going to solve all our problems. And I think the author is basically cautioning that that's not the full picture. Mm-hmm. Like, just taking away the means to do something doesn't solve the actual wounds that cause this to happen. So
yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, and so it's wild. This is such a small thing in the book, but yet has such a big concept behind it. And that's why I feel like this book was so much. Every little thing had like a full purpose behind it. And that was mind-blowing.
Absolutely. And it's done in a way where it doesn't feel overwhelming either, you know. It doesn't feel like it's oversaturated, which is just really amazing. Honestly, cannot speak high enough about this book.
Yeah. One thing I did want to bring up, because I wanted your thoughts on this, was that there was a like parental figure in Kara's life that like appeared from time to time. But I really had a hard time grasping that person's role or who that person was. And so I wanted to know if you had any insight on that. I don't know why it just like went over my head, but it did.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
They seem to have such a special bond, and I like wanted to know more about that.
Definitely. I know who you're talking about. I can't remember their name. I do believe they were a non-binary person. And what I understood about their role in society is I think they are I can't think of what word I'm trying to think of. But they definitely seem like they are like in charge of like a like prostitution like house, I guess.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I'm really blanking on my words, but they also like sell sex themselves. Like they will also do that. But it also seems like it's more than just sex that they do at this house, that it also can be just a place of comfort, even just like, you know, platonic touch is also a part of their services. And so what I understood about their role in Ashtown is that they're just kind of this like place of comfort, and that they end up gaining so much power just from that kind of release that they offer, whether it be sexual or just like a shoulder to cry on, you know, which I thought was fascinating. But at the same time, it was such a small part that I kind of also had a hard time understanding exactly what it was. And what I understand about how Kara meets them is when I think like her mom was involved in the house, and then so when her mom passed, like Kara just kind of stayed there as well. And I wish I remembered the name, but this person pretty much, you know, took them under their wing and was like, okay, we're gonna figure out like, you know, a place for you in society so like that you can take care of yourself, and like I'm gonna help establish you in Ashtown, which I thought was really fascinating.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of that you said really helped, because I feel like as I was reading it alive, it just like went through my head. I was like, I feel like something's going on here, but I can't pick out this particular part. I feel like also because it was so choppy, it just would reappear throughout the book, and you had to kind of like connect the dots.
It was very sprinkled throughout too, and as well as I don't think there's a specific word to sum up the entire like concept of what this was, both the relationship to Kara as well as like their role in Ashtown. So it was very beautifully complicated. But yeah, I can also understand, like, even like myself, like I don't entirely understand the runners. I kind of understand that they're like this, I wouldn't say police, but kind of almost law enforcement, but in a very like a gang rules Ashtown sort of way. And like the gang is head by an emperor, I guess, but I don't think it's as political as it is like just having control over this domain. But even that was kind of a little like, I don't know if there's a specific word for it. It did kind of feel like a gang. It kind of felt like a mafia sort of thing. Um, but very hard to sum up with one word what that is.
Yeah. I think the hard part with the runners too is I was confused as to what it was they actually did.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do they enact violence on like enemies of the emperor, or do they
Yeah.
enact violence on people who are like doing things that the society doesn't want done? Do they protect anyone in specific? Do they not? And I think that also depends on who the emperor is, because that's where the control happens, is like, what does the emperor want done in Ashtown?
Mm-hmm.
But like, it was also very unclear what it was their purpose was. It's just like, okay, well, what do you actually do? Because it
Right.
seemed like, especially like a lot of the characters, including Esther, felt such strong feelings of like animosity and not great things towards the runners. But yet we get this image that they're like really willing to help you get things done. So I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
but what do they actually do when like our characters aren't around? They're just gone. What do the runners do day to day, and why? What is I guess I want
Right.
more information on that.
No, I definitely felt the same way about that. And especially with like the previous emperor, we kind of get this picture that like the runners were a lot more needlessly violent. And even like that concept was a little hard for me to grasp at times, because like we were kind of painted this picture of like in some universes Kara died because she got caught up in like one of like these violent raids by the runners. And it's like, well, what purpose does killing children serve to these people? So it it was, yeah, kind of hard to grasp, but at the same time I feel like it's just like meant to be fear inducing to like gain more control. And it definitely felt like bullying to some extreme, just to like, just to like really have this firm grasp on Ashtown that like this is how like the emperor has power, because like he has the runners to kind of do his bidding. And the runners, I can understand why they would want to be runners, because then they have someone to have their back. Like they're one of the tough guys. So interesting concept, but definitely very hard to sum up
Yeah,
in
and I think it
a
also
few
has to
words.
do with like who these people are, right? Like Adam, Nick, and their father is the three of these men seem to be very, in most versions of the universe, is very much just power hungry people who want control over something to have control. So like,
Mm-hmm.
it would make sense if the runner's only purpose is to provide control for that person, because like that is what the society is based around. Whereas if you had a completely different leader with a different kind of mentality, what would the runners do?
Right.
Because like, in a way, even like fancy Adam has his own like hit force, because he doesn't go out and collaborate with our scientists to make the world better. He needs to kill them so he can be in control. So I feel
Mm-hmm.
like the runners are that, but on a smaller scale. It's just like, keep the law and order so that the person in power continues to have power. um
Yeah, I think that's a perfect connection. I don't remember what the folks were called in like the
yeah.
corporate universe. I think it
Wait,
was
were
like
they like the cleaners, maintenance? That was
maintenance.
it,
That's what
maintenance.
it was. I'm like, it definitely gave you a different image just by title, but they were essentially doing the same thing that the runners were doing, just a lot more behind the scenes.
Yeah.
That it was a very like unknown threat, but just as deadly. And yeah, they were pretty much the runners for Adam in the corporate version.
Yeah. So yeah, I kind of really liked the slip in moment where Kara was like, "Well, they're running out of jobs, so maybe I should join maintenance." And John is like, "No, maintenance is not a good idea."
Yeah.
He was like, that was when my brain was like, "What does maintenance actually do?"
Right. Yeah. That was really awesome. So much going on.
Yeah, so many layers. I really did not expect this book to go where it was going to go. I really thought that when she landed on the alternate world where, you know, Nick needed to take control from Adam, that would be the book, that was the plot, that was the story.
Honestly, I remember being very shocked and had to reread the page when she first started traversing, and then like the narrator or something like says that like, oh, this is like the killing signal, and I was like, oh, wait, is she gonna die? And she like, gets sent to this other universe where there is another version of herself still alive, and she gets like really messed up from it. Like that was such a cool plot twist moment for me. But then yeah, I kind of like got established in that world and thinking, okay, this is going to be the end of the book. But I like that there was more even after that because there is so much to explore in this world. But it does end finitely. I think that I don't think if Johnson would write on in this series that she would continue on specifically with Kara. I feel like it would have to follow at least someone different, even if it's just a different version of her. But yeah.
Yeah, I found that it's the ability that it had to be exactly not what you expected made it so worth it. It was just those kinds of twists that really got me. I was like, I need to know what happens.
Mm-hmm. And there were always pleasant plot twists to me because I don't love plot twists all the time because if it really just comes from nowhere, it kind of pisses me off. That I'm like, literally the writer just put this in here to throw people off, and this doesn't make any sense at all, and I hate this. But this book, like, genuinely delighted me every time. It surprised me that, oh, this is going somewhere I never thought it would, but like I really like this, I really want to read on. So I was just amazed that I was able to do that.
Yeah.
Any other talking points?
I don't think so. I think that's basically everything I had. I'm sure there are a gazillion things that I have forgotten or have not touched on that later will come to me and I'll be like, that was important. Because this book is a layer of multitudes and complex thoughts. And yeah, I think for me it was a fantastic read. I feel like the ending plot, the final concept, the whole like we gotta destabilize Adam, and specifically because of what happened to John, that to me, so many emotions. I rarely cry when reading books, especially these days. I feel like it's just not something that happens. I'm not easy to cry when reading a book. But Kara having to come to terms with what happened to John made me cry so much. It hit. I had I was screenshotting my digital copy, like specific lines that just hit home. And so I think I was very invested in the get back at Adam plot. Mm-hmm. And yet really did enjoy that at the end of the day that, Kara was able to, out of either necessity for the world or finding peace, able to not, kill Adam, was able to, not take the like real revenge strategy, but instead like ruin all of his plans. And I felt like that was so developed of a concept for a character like Kara, where so much has happened in her life, and she has every reason to kill this guy, like every reason to get rid of him, and yet still sees the value that society needs something from him, and is able to mitigate those feelings. And so I think that all of that was just like a lot. And so my brain was just like, I have to read all of this in one go and just feel all my emotions. So
I like that at the same time, it's not like one of those plots when it's like, oh, like I'm not gonna kill you because that would make me just as bad as you. Like,
yeah, I really
tired
hate
of
that
those.
actually.
Yeah, so I like that it made sense, and also that she did kind of get that like taste of revenge and closure in the end, pretty much. So I thought that was very brilliantly handled. And again, also calling back to a different universe that she visited. I love that, to be honest. That, like, not only did Johnson show us these other iterations of the universe just to, like, develop this concept of multi universe travel, but pretty much every single universe, like, she touches on comes back in some way in the story.
Yeah, was one amazing read. Yeah.
Definitely highly recommend if you haven't read it yet and you're still here with us. I have no idea who's watching, but yeah, it's one of those books that I'm like, you're missing out if you don't read this.
Agreed. Well, I'm glad that we got to get together, and I hope that for anyone who watched some part of this, that you got something out of this. Yeah, and do pick up this book if it sounds interesting, and keep an eye on whatever Johnson does next.
Yeah.
I don't know that she has anything planned this year yet, but there's still time for things to appear. So
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what else she writes, and definitely an auto-buy author for me from this point on, I think.
yeah, same. Well, thank you all for coming, and we will see you again next time. Do please also check out my pal Robin's channel at the Bookworm Home.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.